Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to give you a preview of EdgeTX 2.9. You're going to want to stick around and see what they have coming in the summer of 2023, that's for sure. Oftentimes when I do these preview type videos, I get comments along the vein of, hey, how come I don't have the secret decoder ring and how come I can't use the same firmware you're using? The answer is you can. I have a video on the channel that shows how to compile via Gitpod, and if you want, you can also compile via MSys on your own machine, or if you run Linux, you can pull down the build environment and compile it yourself. The pull request I'm using is 3484. So if you'd like to check out the same exact firmware I'm using, you have three options. Number one, you can pull down 3484 in Gitpod and compile it yourself. Number two, you can pull it down to your own build environment via MSys or Linux if you want. And number three, you can get on my Discord and I'll pin this binary in the EdgeTX channel. So if you want to check it out, you can pull the binary down and flash it yourself. With that said, I highly recommend not flying a production airplane with this firmware yet because this is a pre-release stage. You got to let the developers do their job, flesh out all the issues, do their testing, and then make it a main release. If you want to put it on a desktop radio to do some testing, that's fine. But if you decide to pull this binary down and put it in a production radio and go fly with it ahead of the main release, you're taking the life of your model in your own hands. With that out of the way, let's get started. But first, for you electronics gurus and tinkerers out there, check out PCBWay.com. PCBWay has a full suite of services available to make your ideas a reality, including PCB manufacturing and assembly, CNC machining, 3D printing, and injection molding. When you're ready to order, PCBWay provides instant quotes, real-time production tracking, and you can order as few as 5 boards at a time, which is great for early-stage projects. If you need an experienced partner to help bring your ideas to life, check out PCBWay.com. I have a link in the description if you'd like to give them a look. First thing I'll do is show you the version I'm running on each of these radios. So on the left-hand side, I've got Precious, and on the right-hand side, I've got my production radio. This one is EdgeTX 2.8.1. It is Flying Dutchman. This is the main release. I'm actually 2 revisions back. They're up to 2.8.3 right now, and I'm still on 2.8.1. So that's my production flight radio, and this is Precious, my desktop tester, and you can see I've got 2.9.0 self-build. I compiled this on Gitpod. The one thing I want to point out is I have an option in here called No Heli. What that does is take away the Heli tab. I do need to recompile this because I have a feeling one of the configuration options we have on 2.9 will deal with the Heli tab in the radio. So more on that on another video. Stay tuned for that. I do have a feeling that compiling without No Heli will give us a configuration option. We'll see. With that out of the way, the first thing I want to do is get into radio settings. So if I click on the system button and then click on the settings icon, there's a new thing you'll notice right away at the bottom, and it's called View Options on 2.9. When I click on View Options, what they've done is they've added toggle switches for the tabs in both the radio menu and the model menu, which is really cool. You can see on the right-hand side, you don't have that button. There is no View Options button. So what this does is it gives us the opportunity to turn tabs on and off, and they've broken it up into the 2 halves of the radio, the system settings and the model settings. So on the radio menu tabs, we can turn off, for example, themes, global functions, and trainer. I did note when I turn global functions as a tab off, it appears to remove the global functions I've defined as well. So if you turn the tab off, it's more than just a visibility thing. It appears to me that it also disables your global functions. So keep that in mind. I'm going to turn that back on because I use global functions. So I'm going to back out of this settings now, and we're going to go back to the main screen, and you'll see I have fewer icons on this top row than I have on this radio over here. So I've got my main tools menu. That's where your scripts go for tools. You've got the SD card reader, the model settings, global functions, which I left turned on, the hardware page, and the information or versions page. On this radio, you can see I still have my themes and the trainer setup. The trainer setup is in there as well, and that's been removed on this side. So I think it's very cool that they've added configuration options for the tabs that you see on the radio setup. Furthermore, they have tabs for the model menu. So when you're in the model settings, you can turn all the model tabs on and off. And earlier in the video, I mentioned this idea that if I didn't have No Heli compiled in, I bet that I would see a Heli tab in here as well. I'll have to do my homework and show you that in a subsequent video, but that's what I expect to have happen. In any event, notice that we've got toggle switches for flight modes, curves, global variables, logical switches, special functions, and telemetry. You basically can turn the whole thing off. And then when you back out and click on your model settings, and look, you only have the 4 tabs that you have to have for even a rudimentary model setup. You've got the model setup page itself, you've got inputs, mixes, and outputs, nothing else. Very simplified look at the radio. If we compare that to 2.8, we still have our model setup, flight modes, inputs, mixes, outputs, curves, global variables, logical switches, special functions, and telemetry. All of that stuff is gone. But they've taken it one step further. Check this out. When you go on the model setup page, you also have a view options tab down at the bottom. You do not have that on pre 2.9. Here's the row of configuration options we have on 2.9. We've got internal RF, external, trainer, the 3 timers, pre-flights, trims, and throttle. That matches 2.9 with the addition of view options and USB joystick. Let's take a look at both of those. Under view options, you have the same kind of layout you have in the main radio setup, except this is model specific. So you have the ability under the radio menu tabs to either use the global setting, which is in the radio settings, or you can do a per model setting and say, no, I don't care what the radio settings overall are, kind of like the global settings. I want my themes enabled for this particular model. So you can turn that back on in the per model setup. Same thing with global functions. You can turn those on, and the trainer screen if you want to turn those on. What's really cool about that is if you have just one trainer set up, so one model that you fly as a trainer, but that's the only one out of 25 you have on your radio, you don't need the trainer tab for every single model. You can set it up so the trainer tab is only enabled when you're on the trainer model itself. Very, very cool. And then on the model menu tabs, you also have the same options to turn on flight modes, curves, global variables, and so on. You can either follow the global setting, or you can have a per model setting that says on or off. So if you choose off, it doesn't matter what the global settings are, the per model settings will override that. And for example, it'll turn flight modes off no matter what the global setting says. I want to leave flight modes on because there's something I want to show you in there as well. That's it for the model setup. Those are the big adds for the view options. And then there's another thing they put in here called USB joystick. And when you click on that, there's an option to leave it in mode classic or advanced. Honestly, I haven't tinkered with this yet, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on in here, but you have the ability to change it from joystick to gamepad to multi-axis controller, and then it looks like you have the ability to do some remapping of what the channel is. It can be a button and access or a sim, and I'm not sure what that sim means, and you can invert the channel right here inside the joystick setup. I'll have to put some video material together on this at a later time because I haven't really used it with the computer yet, so I'm not exactly sure how everything comes together, but it is interesting to me that they put a lot of effort into the joystick configuration options on the radio. Now I'm going to go back into view options and turn everything back on because there are a few graphic things I want to make sure we can show you. So we're going to turn everything on. We're going to ignore the global settings and just turn every one of these tabs on. And we're going to start with flight modes right off the bat. So in flight modes, I'm going to bring in the other radio, and just to give you a reminder of what happens when you're in flight modes on 2.8, that's the view you get with each flight mode being a button. And if you want to make changes in that flight mode, you click on it. And then if you want to manipulate trims, for example, you click on setup, and then you can manipulate your trims. So a little bit of extra click work in 2.8, and that's been changed in 2.9. We're kind of back to the more classic layout where everything is on the main screen. So if I click on flight modes, right away I have access to turning the trims on and off, and I can name it and change the fade in and fade out times when you activate a flight mode. So what they did is they made it a little bit more touch efficient is what they did over 2.8. The next thing I'm going to do is skip over to the curves because everything before that for inputs, mixes, and outputs looks the same to me. I want to jump right into curves, and they rearranged the curve presentation. So here's the curve summary screen. I've already added one example curve. You can click on that and hit edit, and you can of course adjust your curve. I don't know if they made curves touch yet. Nope, doesn't look like it. I've been waiting for that one, but you can still manipulate your curves just like normal. You just click on the field that you want to change, and then you can use the numeric keys to adjust the curve value. So very much like curves on 2.8 and earlier, the main thing that's been changed is the presentation. On 2.8, when it came to curves, we had this presentation, which honestly, it wasted a lot of screen space. There's a whole lot of dead space over here that just didn't need to be wasted, and I think they've done a nice job cleaning that up and giving us a better presentation for curves. So very cool. I definitely approve of that. Global variables looks pretty much the same way it did before, except they're using the new Lvgl layout because all the corners are rounded. And then on the logical switch settings, again, pretty much the same. There's nothing really different in the edit page. That looks very similar to 2.8 and earlier, but they're using that Lvgl layout, so you've got that same look and feel and consistency throughout the radio. Same thing with special functions, although one change I did notice, they renamed this from switch to trigger. That makes sense because not every trigger for a special function is actually a switch. It can be logic. So it makes sense to me that they relabeled this trigger instead of switch. And then finally on the telemetry page, I did want to show these side by side because they rearranged telemetry a little bit. So on the telemetry page on 2.9, at the very top now, you have sensors starting off the screen. On the old version, they had RSSI and RSSI alerts at the top of the screen. So sensors come first and then the controls for sensors. And then the other thing they did is they relabeled this section, which has to do with receiver stats. The old way was RSSI. The problem with labeling this RSSI is it wasn't always RSSI. It could have been RQLI, for example. It really depended on the protocol developer and what they sent as the first stat back to the radio. With the advent of the multi-protocol module, that was one of those things that needed to be cleaned up, and they finally got to it. So this is now called RX stats. And of course, you can still add your low and critical alarm values in there. And then they finish off the page with the variometer, which is how they finished it on 2.8 and earlier. There's one other major thing I need to tell you, and that's that starting with 2.9, the radio will only support YAML configurations. You won't have support for binary conversions on the radio. So up until 2.8, you could come over to EdgeTX from OpenTX simply by flashing the firmware, and the firmware on the radio would take care of converting your models over to the YAML format. In 2.9, that feature will be removed. So going forward, if you convert from OpenTX to EdgeTX, you're going to have to put a version of EdgeTX between 2.6 and 2.8.3 on your radio first to convert your model files over to YAML. Then you can upgrade to 2.9. Just keep that in mind. That's a pretty big step. All right, that wraps up most of the user impacting upgrades for 2.9 that you'll actually see. There are some under the hood changes being made, and as I get a better understanding of what those changes are and how they impact the experience, we will cover those in a later video, probably when 2.9 drops. So hang tight for information about what's going on under the hood. For now, just understand that the EdgeTX guys have done a fantastic job improving the interface. This is one of those early objective goals that I knew they had, and that's simplifying the interface and making the radio and the configuration more approachable. So now with all these cool configuration options, you have the ability to make the radio your own. You can turn things off that you no longer need to use, and that helps you customize the radio to your own liking, and that's never the wrong answer. So as usual, thanks again to the EdgeTX development team. I think this is an amazing group of people, and I'm really grateful for the amount of work they put into making this firmware more approachable, more user-friendly, and more refined as we go along in time. If you like this kind of content, make sure you smash that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when new videos hit the channel. YouTube should recommend another video for you right about now. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy and get out there and fly something.